Hi, and welcome to another Reuters Events Executive Interview. I'm Liam Dowd, Managing Director at Reuters Events Sustainable Business, and it's my pleasure to be joined by Todd Cline, the Director at Procter & Gamble's North America Fabric Care Research and Development. Welcome, Todd. I hope you're well.
Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure to have you here. And I'd like to kick off our discussion just by asking a little bit for you to, if you can, explain what P&G Fabric Care's commitment is with regards to environmental sustainability.
Yeah, from a commitment to environmental sustainability, we really try to be both a force for growth and a force for good in everything we do at P&G. So it's really built into our DNA. If you look even at our corporate mission statement, our purpose is to provide products of superior quality and value that improve lives now and for generations to come. So we don't just think about today, we think about the long-term aspects of everything we do. And the key tool that we do that, because we're really a science-based company, is something called life cycle assessment. And it's not specific to P&G, but it's a scientific tool that looks at the full impact of every product, starting with what's the impact of making the raw materials that you use, the packaging components, our operations to make the products, distributing the products out to our retailer partners as well as to our consumers, the in-use phase, which is critical for us from a fabric care standpoint, and then also even end of life. What happens with what goes down the drain from the washing machine or for many of our other products, as well as what happens with the packaging, whether it's hopefully being recycled or if it's going to landfill. We've got a tool that looks at what's our total impact across all of those different aspects. And we really focus on science to guide where can we have the biggest impact from an environmental standpoint. And that's really how we think about focusing our sustainability efforts from a really scientific method to have the biggest impact that we can.
That's great. That's great. And you talk to taking a long-term view and really a focus on impact. And many companies will talk to ambition, but I find it more telling to understand what's the actual tangible goals, when you start looking at key goals, metrics and timelines. So it'd be great if you can just share some more around some potential goals, metrics and timelines that you set within your own division.
Yeah, sure. Being a database company, we have quantitative goals for just about everything. So we're just wrapping up our 2020 goals, many of which we were able to achieve well ahead of schedule. But we just recently launched what we call our P&G Ambition 2030 program, which lays out our goals for the next 10 years. And it really segments into a couple of different areas. One are core corporate goals that the company is taking on, but then also we have specific goals for each of the key leadership brands. So from a corporate standpoint, some of our key goals are number one, to be at 100% renewable energy in our operations and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 50% through all of our operations. From a packaging standpoint, assuring that 100% of our packaging is either recyclable or reusable, but also focusing on how do we reduce our dependence on virgin resin in plastics by 50% per use over the decade, which is a huge reduction in the amount of virgin resin used and dependence on petroleum. And then finally, also just water efficiency. How do we get more efficient and use 35% less water in our operations? So those are total P&G corporate goals. Then as we get down to specifically as we look at like Tide, where I'm working, our number one focus is really about cold water cleaning. I talked about we use life cycle assessment as our goal for where do we have our biggest impacts. 2/3 of the overall carbon emissions or climate change issue with doing laundry comes from the consumer use phase. And that's driven by heating up the water to do the laundry. So the number one focus we're going to have is about how do we continue to drive adoption of cold water cleaning. But then from a packaging standpoint, Tide bottles are already 100% recyclable and contain 25% recycled material in them. From an operations standpoint, we're actually already at 100% renewable electricity in our North America operations for fabric and home care. And it's powered by a wind farm that we built in Texas. And then from a distribution standpoint, we've actually found a way to cut 3 million truck miles annually through design of our distribution system by combining a few of our distribution centers.
That's great. That's great. And you talked to some real lofty goals there. So it's going to be interesting to see how they pan out. And it's very ambitious from yourself and your colleagues. And you did mention the consumers there, but I want to come to them in a bit, because I think they're an important piece to the puzzle. But you mentioned how in the middle of that, and I find that's a very interesting aspect. For companies, the how, but also with that, the how aspect is it always brings the challenges. What are the challenges when trying to reach these goals? So, from your perspective, when looking at the environmental footprint, what would you say is the biggest challenge for P&G Fabric? And importantly, and value to the people watching this, how are you looking to address it?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest challenge we're all dealing with right now is climate change. And that's really where we're focused in, is how do we reduce our impact relative to climate change? I mentioned that as we look at life cycle assessment, or the LCA, 2/3 of the total carbon impact of doing laundry is in the use phase. And again, that's due to heating water to do the laundry. So if we can, number one, we have to design our products to work great on cold. And as an R&D guy, that's what our job is how do we assure that the products are really designed to work on cold? So we have specific enzymes designed to work at very low temperatures, polymers that help boost surfactancy on cold, everything we can to make sure that the product delivers on cold. And then we have to convince the consumer to do it. If we can convince people to switch from warm to cold, they actually reduce their energy consumption by 70% in a load of laundry. And if they go from hot to cold, it's a 90% reduction. So I think our biggest challenge is how do we overcome that consumer habit? So number one, we have to design the products to delight when people use cold water. And then two, how do we really help consumers overcome that habit of choosing warmer temperatures than cold?
That's great. That's great. And one thing I've seen and heard a lot this year, through the multiple events we've run and interviews I've done, people keep on talking to the importance of collaborations to scale the impact, to scale the ambitions and the visions that all the organizations like yourself have. So, to yourself, how important are collaborations to you to help you reach your goals? And can you talk to any innovative collaborations that you're part of?
Yeah. So number one, I think all of us recognize what we're trying to solve is bigger than any single one of us. And we're all going to be dependent on great collaborations to really make progress on solving the environmental challenges ahead of us. Um, I think we have a history of doing this. If we look back to the 1980s, even, we led a collaboration that created the recycle stream for colored plastics. So at that time, there was not a recycling infrastructure to recycle plastics in the US. And we led the collaboration across what could become the collectors, the sorters, the processors, and then us as the end user of creating a recycle stream for high density polyethylene, which is the material that Tide bottles were made out of then, still made out of today. So really bringing together the full end-to-end infrastructure to help create that recycling stream that we still use today, and we're still using that same PCR or recycled material to put into Tide bottles today. So I think that's a great example of in the past where we've done it. I think more recently, on the packaging standpoint, again, we've got a great collaboration with TerraCycle. First thing we do is everyone doesn't have access to curbside recycling. So working with TerraCycle on how do we fill in some of those gaps where people don't have availability of curbside recycling is one of the areas. But another one is we certainly strive for everything we have to be recyclable at curbside today, but we don't always get there, especially right from the start. And an example of that is the EcoBox package that we launched about a year ago, and it's really designed specifically for e-commerce or optimized for e-commerce. And we have Tide in EcoBox, but also Gain, Dreft, Downy, so several of our brands. And it's an innovative package that reduces the amount of plastic by 60%. So it's a huge reduction in
Mm.
plastic where it uses paperboard for the main structure of the package, and then a bladder inside the package to hold the liquid and a tap to dispense it. So a great step forward from a progress in reducing the amount of package. Unfortunately, right now, those internal bladders are not yet curbside recyclable. So we've got a partnership with TerraCycle so that when consumers use the EcoBox, they can still get the material back to TerraCycle and it can be reused again. So that's a place where, again, we're using partnerships to create availability for recycling of packaging. But we're always looking for partnerships, whether it's innovative ingredients, packaging, washing machine manufacturers. We do a lot of work with the machine manufacturers on how do we continue to drive both down the temperature, but also drive up the consumer experience in cold. Because the key there again is there can't be any trade-offs. The consumer has to be happy because it's too easy to turn back to warm. And even apparel manufacturers and looking at how do we stretch our impact to even help clothes last longer and further our impact from an environmental standpoint. The average American throws away about 70 pounds of textiles per year that go to landfill. So we work with our product, but also clothing manufacturers on how can we extend the life of that so that we're not replacing clothes as quickly. So I'd say we look pretty broadly from a partnership standpoint.
Wow. I must admit, I wouldn't even thought of some of some of the avenues that you went down with the collaboration. But that shows when you start opening that box and thinking all the different impacts and all the different areas you could have other entities plug in. I suppose the list just grows and grows, and that's great to hear. And I said I'd come to the point on consumers, and you've mentioned them a couple of times now through the responses. And from our knowledge and obviously your knowledge, some of the biggest impacts are had at the consumer using stage. But you touched upon there, it's easy for them to go back to the warmer temperatures, and they want that quality that they trust and associate with your brand. So there's obviously an engagement piece there. So what I suppose what actionable steps are you taking to help consumers live more sustainably, help lessen the impact of using your products and their lives at home?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think number one, we found from all of our learning with our consumers is people want to have a positive impact. They want to reduce their impact and make more sustainable choices, but we can't make it difficult. We have to make it simple and easy to incorporate into their lives. We can't ask people to make major trade-offs in the way they do things, pay a lot more for it. The more we can make it simple and easy to incorporate it, the more we find it sticks as a habit. So first thing we do by far, design all of our products to really delight consumers on cold water. So we have to make sure that when they choose cold, when they take the clothes out of the washer or the dryer, they're delighted by the experience. So that's number one thing we do is make sure that our products work great on cold. But we build in a lot of other things to our products and packaging to help them make easy, sustainable choices as well. Another great example where the consumer doesn't have to do anything is suds control. As we've moved to high efficiency machines in North America, there's actually a sensor in the machine. And at the end of the cycle, it senses, are there still suds remaining? And if there are, it will go into additional rinse cycles. So it actually uses extra water. So you get this machine that's meant to be more sustainable. But if you don't have a detergent that's formulated to be low enough suds in the machine, you actually end up using extra water. So we're really, really diligent about focusing on suds control to make sure that it doesn't cause high efficiency machines to use any extra water. So again, that's something the consumer doesn't have to do anything to change their habit. They just use our product and it's built in for them. Another great example is Tide Pods. It's super concentrated product. It's 90% less water than a traditional liquid detergent. So the consumer just has to buy the product and use it. They don't have to do anything to change what they do in their lives, and they're able to reduce the amount of water used in their detergent by 90%. And then again, from a packaging standpoint, we really design it to make it as easy as possible to have it be easily recyclable. Curbside is always our goal, but even with the Eco Box, where we help the consumer reduce their plastic usage by 60%, we give them that tool via TerraCycle to still be able to recycle the internal bladder. But I think for us, it's all about how do we make it really, really simple and intuitive, and if possible, no effort by the consumer to have more sustainable impacts.
Okay. And you mentioned there the no effort for consumers, and that's, I suppose that's the best approach and the easiest engagement techniques is when it's little to no effort for them. So what do you see as the biggest challenge when you're engaging the consumers around sustainable behavior change?
Yeah. So I think probably not surprisingly to you, based on the earlier conversations, the big one we're taking on is how do we convince consumers to make that habit change of going to cold water? And it's a long-term ingrained habit with consumers. Um, people know some of the benefits of cold water today because they already wash their most precious garments on cold. And that's because people know that if you wash on cold, they won't shrink. It helps protect your colors better. It helps your clothes last longer. So consumers already understand that. But there's also this fundamental tension of, but if I use warmer or hotter water, it cleans things better. So especially as you get into towels and sheets and undergarments and things like that, people are really hesitant about using cold water. So that's really where we're focused is how do we design the product experiences and educate consumers to make that choice? So from a product standpoint, we've actually set the bar and we're delivering on it of making sure that Tide on cold actually works better than the bargain detergents does on hot. So think about that.
Mm.
All the temperature plus the detergent, we can perform better for them on cold. And we think that's the type of standard we have to really get consumers to trust. I'm going to use the cold cycle all the time. So that's the first piece is make sure we deliver on the product experience as we try to encourage people to make this choice. And I think the second is just help people along on what are all the benefits of cold water. Like I said, the benefits from helping your garments last longer. A lot of people already know that. They may not talk about it, but intuitively, people understand that cold water is better for helping their clothes last longer. The other things that we're trying to bring to life, though, are you can save money. If you switch from hot to cold, you can save over $100 a year on your electricity bills. $100 can go a long way, and it's just in choosing to use cold water as you do the laundry. Seems like an easy choice of I'll give you $100 to just use cold all year. So we think that helps the fact that there's a financial benefit to doing it. But then also, like I said, people want to have an impact. So educating people on how big an impact this is from an environmental standpoint as well. You can reduce the energy by 90%, which translates directly to the carbon footprint you have. It's the equivalent of in a year driving from Los Angeles to Las Vegas or powering your cell phone battery for its entire life. So making that one little choice. But if we can get millions of households making that choice, we can reduce millions of tons of carbon emissions and have a really big impact from an environmental standpoint.
That's great, and there's some great opportunities there for firstly on the impacts and savings you can have, but secondly, you mentioned it's opening up doors of new USPs, competitive advantage that is great to hear because that just convinces all the other businesses that maybe aren't seeing this as an opportunity for them. So that's a great refreshing point. I think it's unfortunately I suppose a high point to end on because unfortunately we've run out of time. But Todd, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your work and the impacts that you're having at P&G and the goals that you've got. There's some lofty goals, but by the sound of it, you're well on the way to understanding and working towards them.
Well, thank you so much for having me in it. And again, I think it's just these little choices that consumers can make can really add up if we get everyone doing them. And we're excited to be one of the players that's helping spark that change.
That's great. Well, thank you very much again and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.